A ballistic missile hits a civilian airport, then retaliatory airstrikes take out critical infrastructure. Look, this isn't just some distant news item from the Middle East. It's really a window, isn't it, into a world order that's changing fast and, well, it impacts all of us. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here as always to unpack the key insights from the sources you give us. Our job is to lay out these ideas impartially, just let you see the different viewpoints, understand them, and draw your own conclusions. We're not here to push any one perspective. Okay, so let's unpack this latest news. Just a few days back, August 23rd, 2025, we saw Iran-backed Houthi rebels launch a ballistic missile. And this thing had a cluster bomb warhead, the kind that spreads smaller bombs over a huge area, aimed right at Israeli territory. That's quite an escalation.
It absolutely is. And Israel's response was immediate. The very next day, August 24th, they sent more than 10 aircraft, dropped something like 35 munitions on Houthi positions back in Yemen. They specifically went after military sites, power plants. Now, this isn't just your standard tit for tat. The sources we looked at, they suggest this points to a proxy force that's getting desperate. You had retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Blaine Holt on Newsmax describing it as basically operating on last gasp orders coming out of Tehran.
Last gasp. That really paints a picture, doesn't it? Like maybe a final desperate push. But General Holt also warned this, quote, could widen the war, especially as Israel is, finishing up its campaign against Hamas in Gaza. Yeah. So what are we really seeing here? What's the bigger picture?
Well, we're definitely witnessing a critical moment. It looks like the dramatic unraveling of Iran's long-planned ring of fire strategy. That whole idea was to encircle Israel with proxies, destabilize it. But it's also shining a harsh light on the huge costs and, frankly, the strategic shifts that are hitting the United States and really impacting the wider global competition.
Okay, so our mission today, then, is to really dig deep into these sources. We want to understand not just these headlines from the last few days, but the broader story. How are these conflicts actively reshaping alliances? How are they influencing global power? And crucially, what does it all mean for American strength and, for your security? Let's start with that ring of fire strategy you mentioned, Iran's strategy. What exactly is it, and why do our sources frame it as being so dangerous?
Right. So across the board, our sources point to Iran as the, quote, chief common threat, both to the U.S. and to Israel in that region. This ring of fire strategy, it's pretty ambitious. It seems to have three main goals. 1, control the Middle East. 2, dislodge the U.S. from the region. And 3, ultimately, destroy Israel. And the way they try to do this is by surrounding Israel with this network of proxies. Groups like Hezbollah up in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis down in Yemen. These groups often get ballistic missiles, other advanced weapons, straight from Iran. And they're very explicit about their goal, annihilating the Jewish state. It's designed as an existential threat.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like an existential threat.
Yeah.
So given that, how do the sources show Israel pushing back? We keep reading about these extraordinary military operations.
Yeah, and this is where things get really dynamic. Israel has, according to these sources, fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. They've done it through a series of, decisive, often preemptive actions. Take Hamas, for example. Operation Swords of Iron, that's Israel's big ongoing campaign since October 7th, 2023. It has apparently dismantled Hamas's command structure in Gaza, hit its military infrastructure hard. It's a sustained push to, neutralize that key proxy.
Okay, and what about Hezbollah? They're another major piece of this ring of fire, right?
Absolutely. With Hezbollah, Israel's used more targeted strikes. They've eliminated senior Hezbollah terrorists, taken out strategic targets. And the sources suggest this has really led to Hezbollah's retreat and weakening. It's degraded their ability to operate effectively right there on Israel's northern border. Then you have the Houthis. We've seen these retaliatory strikes like the one just happened on August 24th. They've hit key Houthi assets, Sana'a airport, power stations, and the stated goal is pretty clear. Choke off their supply of Iranian weapons. The thinking is simple. They cannot fire what they do not have.
Right. Deny them the tools they need. But what about Iran itself? The sources mentioned something pretty pivotal, directly hitting Iran's own capabilities.
Yes, that was Operation Rising Lion, described as a covert preemptive strike. Israel carried it out, apparently with significant U.S. support, and it went deep inside Iran. Our sources are calling this a historic blow to Iran's nuclear program. It targeted critical centrifuge manufacturing plants, missile guidance systems, and cyber command centers. The assessment seems to be that this set back Iran's nuclear goals by years and really shaken its credibility as a regional power.
So it really does seem like this ring of fire is, as Ambassador Danny Danon said, unraveling. But then you have Mark Dubowitz from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies suggesting October 7th was more like a weapon of mass distraction, a way for Iran to keep eyes off its WMD programs while expanding them. What's the main takeaway for you, the listener, when you see these different takes?
Well, I think it highlights something crucial. You need decisive action against state-sponsored terror. It seems essential. While Iran might be trying to distract and expand its more dangerous capabilities, the actions by Israel, sometimes with U.S. backing, they're directly tackling the root threats. They're compromising the ability of these destabilizing groups to act. And maybe it's not just about winning battles, you know? It might be about actually redefining deterrence in a world where proxies give states this low-cost, deniable way to fight. It forces the U.S. and its allies to either innovate their strategy or risk just being constantly drained. It really shows how critical strong allies are when facing threats head-on in such a volatile place.
These Israeli operations are definitely reshaping things over there.
Sure.
But, like any conflict, strategic wins come with a cost. And for a key ally like the United States, those costs seem to be getting, well, pretty significant. Let's dig into the financial side, the strategic strains this puts on America.
Absolutely. And the figures and the sources, they're stark, really eye-opening sometimes. The U.S. has provided over $17 billion in arms and financing to Israel since October 7, 2023. That's to support their defense, their operations. And then the U.S. military itself, it's spent an estimated $3 billion so far on operations against the Houthis down in Yemen. That includes, get this, $1 billion in munitions and operational costs in just one recent campaign alone.
Wow, $1 billion just on munitions and operations against a proxy group. That's a staggering number. But it's not just the money, is it? There's more to it.
Exactly right. Pentagon officials are reportedly very concerned about just how fast the military was burning through its ammunition stocks in Yemen. For example, the Navy fired 125 Tomahawk missiles. Those are the, long-range precision ones. That's over 3% of the entire U.S. Tomahawk arsenal. Plus, they used 155 Standard missiles. Those are usually for air defense or anti-ship stuff against the Houthis just since October 2023. That is a huge expenditure of very high-value weapons.
3% of the Tomahawk arsenal against a proxy group. That single number really drives home the scale, doesn't it? So what does using up ammo this fast mean for overall military readiness? Especially when you think about, bigger global threats.
Well, critics like defense analyst Michael Frydenberg argue this rate of use undermines the U.S.'s preparedness for a sustained direct conflict with a peer competitor like China. These advanced munitions, they're seen as critical for any potential big fight in the Indo-Pacific. And Dan Grazier from the Stimson Center, he points out that just the sheer financial mismatch. You're using a $2 million missile to defeat a $1,000 drone. This isn't just a budget headache. It's described as a strategic vulnerability amplifier. It shows how easily adversaries can potentially pin down and deplete advanced forces with cheap asymmetric tactics. It forces a really hard look at global readiness and where resources should go.
Okay, so while we're heavily invested resource-wise in the Middle East, our focus and our valuable assets are being pulled away from, as the sources say, a grinding war in Europe and a rising threat in East Asia, meaning China. That sounds like a textbook strategic dilemma, juggling multiple big challenges at once.
It really is. The sources clearly map out this loose coalition of adversaries. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. They seem to be cooperating to challenge American power globally. You see Russia giving advanced air defense to Iran. And there's apparently evidence to suggest that Beijing has also helped to funnel arms and equipment to terrorist groups attacking Israel. It's a stark reminder that these regional conflicts often directly feed into and are influenced by the larger great power competition. It creates this really complex, tangled web of threats for the U.S. and its allies.
And these regional fights, they don't happen in a bubble, right? International organizations often get involved or at least impacted. So how does an organization like the UN fit into this messy picture, according to the sources we reviewed?
Well, the sources are pretty critical, actually. They argue the UN has often been doing more to hinder progress than help it, responding with paralysis, moral equivalency, or outright hostility toward Israel and the United States. They specifically point to what they see as the UN's failure to call out Tehran's sponsorship of terror and its, quote, silence on Hamas's use of human shields. These actions, or maybe inactions, are viewed by some in the sources as really undermining its credibility, and one source even says costing lives. The view presented is that this posture inadvertently emboldens Israel's enemies, which makes it harder to find broader international backing for real stability and peace.
Okay, so amidst all these challenges, the costs, the criticisms, our sources also point to a potential shift. something being called a ring of hope, and a sort of evolution in the U.S. Israel relationship. What does that look like?
Right. It seems Israel's recent military actions, combined with new diplomatic frameworks like the Abraham Accords, those normalization deals between Israel and several Arab nations, they might be opening what one source calls a rare window for regional peace. Ambassador Danny Danon is quoted calling for a shift from defense to dialogue, suggesting a move towards more cooperation in the region.
Interesting. And there's this Heritage Foundation report mentioned titled From Special Relationship to Strategic Partnership 2029-2047. What's the main idea behind that proposed change for the U.S.-Israel link?
The core idea there is really to elevate the relationship, move it beyond Israel being seen mainly as a security aid recipient towards being an equal strategic partnership. The report argues Israel isn't a beleaguered and isolated experiment anymore. It's described as a powerful and successful young state. Its defense spending is projected to hit $32.4 billion, which is like 6.5% of its GDP in 2025. So the proposal involves phasing out traditional U.S. military financing, moving more towards direct military sales, increasing spending on cooperative programs, basically recognizing Israel as a security producer and a major economic engine, too.
So the thinking is to make Israel more self-sufficient, and in doing so, make it an even stronger, more capable partner in the region.
Exactly. The ultimate aim is deeper regional integration, enhancing security and commercial ties between the Jewish state and its Arab neighbors. That means things like expanding the Abraham Accords, maybe bringing in Saudi Arabia, perhaps even countries like Indonesia, and reviving ideas like the Middle East Strategic Alliance, MESA, that proposed regional security and economic pact, but this time actively including Israel. The vision seems to be creating new markets, new avenues for trade, energy cooperation, all based on mutual prosperity, building a stronger pro-American structure in the region.
That sounds like a potentially more durable, sustainable approach.
Yeah.
What are the shared values or common threats mentioned as the foundation for this kind of partnership?
Well, it's anchored in two things, primarily: shared democratic values and a clear recognition of common threats. Those threats are listed as Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons and regional hegemony, Sunni Islamist extremism and terrorism, and, importantly, great power competition with China and Russia in the Middle East. So this strategic realignment, the goal is to strengthen allies, weaken enemies, and try to insulate these critical relationships from shifting short-term political pressures, aiming for more long-term stability and prosperity.
We've spent a lot of time on the strategy, the money, the geopolitics. But let's definitely not forget the human side of all this. The sources really bring that home.
They do, and the human cost is it's immense. It's deeply personal. You look at the October 7th attacks, hundreds of civilians and soldiers dead or wounded, stories like Nadav Popplewell dying tragically in captivity, or Dolev Yehud's disfigured remains being found. They just underscore the sheer brutality involved. Then you have Hezbollah's constant rocket fire from Lebanon. It's forced 60,000 Israeli civilians, including 15,000 children, they say, to flee their homes. Northern border towns described as ghost towns. And the Salab family story, living through something that repeats itself every generation. It's just heartbreaking. It speaks to this deep, recurring trauma.
And on the Palestinian side, the humanitarian situation sounds incredibly difficult as well.
It absolutely is. The sources mention more than 16,000 Palestinians have already fled Gaza this month. Aid groups are reporting severe shortages of food, fuel, and medicine. It's clearly a worsening crisis. Now, Israeli officials, they state they allow controlled aid deliveries, but they also accuse Hamas of diverting that aid, which, obviously complicates the relief efforts enormously. Adding another layer, Blaine Holt's perspective, noted in the sources, expresses disappointment that the Arab world is not taking in their own people as refugees, feeling like everybody's just putting the burden on Israel. He also notes that Israel does as much to feed the population of their enemy as Israel does in Gaza. That perspective, that Israel's own humanitarian efforts are maybe overlooked, is definitely present in our sources.
And related to aid, there are also these strong calls highlighted in the sources to defund the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA. That's the specific UN agency for Palestinian refugees. This seems driven by long-held concerns about anti-Semitism within the agency and allegations of support for terrorism. Plus, some sources push for conditioning aid to Palestinians on implementing robust de-radicalization programs. All this points toward the desire, expressed in these materials, for much greater accountability and reform in how aid gets distributed to try and make sure it supports peace, not more conflicts. So wrapping this up, what we've really dug into today shows a Middle East undergoing profound change. You've got Israel taking very strong action against serious threats, And you have the U.S. seemingly reevaluating its commitments, its resources, its partnerships in that region.
Yeah, the potential shift from that ring of fire towards maybe a ring of hope, it's incredibly significant. But it's going to demand really clear-eyed leadership, smart management of resources, and just a solid, unwavering commitment to allies. The costs involved, as we've discussed, are undeniably high, but the sources strongly argue that the alternative, doing nothing in the face of aggression, could be far worse for both regional and global stability.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. This isn't just some abstract story playing out far away. The strategic choices made in D.C. and Jerusalem, the billions in military resources being used up, the alliances being tested or rebuilt in the Middle East, all of that directly impacts America's standing in the world, its economic health, and, yeah, ultimately your own security and prosperity. And so as you think about that financial mismatch, spending millions on missiles to down cheap drones, and you consider the growing challenge from big competitors like China and Russia, how much should these Middle East conflicts really dictate America's long-term strategic focus? What does a truly ironclad commitment to allies actually look like when our resources are stretched thin across the globe? And what does that demand from us, perhaps, in terms of new thinking, innovation, and tough choices about priorities?